All right, everyone. Welcome back to George Orwell's Animal Farm. Today we're going to be in Chapter 6. So just to review real quick, we know that in Chapter 1, we met Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm, who took terrible care of his animals. The animals actually got together and rebelled because of Old Major, the boar, who came up with the idea that we should definitely get rid of these humans that are living off of us, and that we're not able to do anything for ourselves. So over a series of chapters, the animals rise up, they rebel, and you notice very quickly that individuals like Boxer, the large workhorse, that he is doing most of the work. You've got Molly, a spoiled white horse, who eventually leaves Animal Farm, and we talked about how that represented a lot of the rich people who left the Soviet Union when things got a little tough. We know at this point that Molly has left the farm and that the pigs are rising to power, and that is no good for the other animals. Napoleon, for example, is one pig who has driven off his enemy and his competitor, Snowball. And so the only person left in charge right at this point is Napoleon himself. And so the real question becomes at this point, what is it that they have to worry the most about? And this chapter is actually going to be about how is it that they're going to build that windmill. Remember that the windmill was an idea of Snowball's that Napoleon stole. And at this point, I think we probably need to start with the first question on your answer key, which is, what will it take to really build this windmill? This, students, would be much like the windmill that they're going to build in Animal Farm. We're just going to use some 3D tools here to take a look at this. Probably this is the type of windmill they'd be asked to build. It would be more primitive than the ones that you or I see along the highway, along Kansas. And so most of it is going to be made out of stone, okay? The main body will be made out of stone. We've got a problem, though. I think the animals can come up with stone, but the real difficulty is going to be how are they going to get the machinery, the cables, some of the tools they need to put together the more mechanical part of the windmill. So start to think through that. So again, before you start the chapter, answer those questions at the beginning that ask about the windmill. What's it going to take for the animals to be able to build the windmill with all their resources on Animal Farm? And with that, let's start chapter 6. First line, great line. All that year, the animals worked like slaves. What a great simile there. It really sets the tone. We've got like, so we've got a simile. Sets the tone for the rest of the chapter. First comparison is the animals working like slaves. All that year, the animals worked like slaves, but they were happy in their work. They grudged no effort or sacrifice, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Interesting. Calls them a pack of human beings. Usually we think of wolves or predators in packs. That's a good comparison as well. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour week, and in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoons as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animal who absented himself from it would have his rations reduced by half. Now, I know there's a question about your strictly voluntary work. Even so, it was found necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was a little less successful than in the previous years, and 2 fields which should have been sown with roots in the early summer were not sown because of the plowing had not been completed early enough. It was possible to foresee the coming winter would be a hard one. Now, you notice I am pointing things out for you here, but the real purpose of this is for you to follow along in your own book, and just mark when I ask you to, okay? So please use your own book as much as you can. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was a good quarry of limestone on the farm, quarry like a deposit of rock, and plenty of sand and cement had been found in one of the outhouses, so that all the materials for building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not at first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this except with picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort did the right idea occur to somebody, namely to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used as they were lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals lashed ropes round these, and then all together, cows, horses, sheep, any animal that could lay hold of the rope, even the pigs sometimes join in at the critical moments, they dragged them with desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they were toppled over the edge to shatter to pieces below. Doesn't that sound like fun? Transporting the stone when it was once broken was comparatively simple. The horses carried it off in cartloads. The sheep dragged single blocks. Even Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into an old governess cart and did their share. By late summer, a sufficient store of stone had been accumulated, and then the building began under the superintendence of the pigs. Probably saw that one coming, right? Pigs doing the superintendence or the overseeing. But it was a slow, laborious process. Ooh, good word. Laborious. Laborious. All right. We've got that word labor and laborious. That might tell us what it might mean. Laborious means there's lots of labor or lots of work. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry, and sometimes, when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength seemed to equal to that of all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulder began to slip and the animals cried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill, it was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to a stop. To see him toiling up the slope, inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hoofs clawing at the ground, and his great sides matted with sweat, filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His two slogans, "I will work harder," and "Napoleon is always right." So interesting. We now have two slogans. First one was "I will work harder," but now he's decided that Napoleon is always right. His two slogans, "I will work harder" and "Napoleon is always right," seemed to him a sufficient answer to all problems. He had made arrangements with the cockerel to call him 3/4 of an hour earlier in the mornings, instead of half an hour. And in his spare moments, of which there were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the site of the windmill unassisted. Wow. We can tell Boxer again. Boxer, who represents our what? That's right, our proletariats, our working class. You can tell the proletariats were really, really carrying the USSR, the Soviet Union, when it became communist. The animals were not badly off throughout that summer, in spite of the hardness of their work. If they had no more food than they had had in Jones's day, at least they did not have less. The advantage of only having to feed themselves and not having to support 5 extravagant human beings as well was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animal method of doing things was more efficient and saved labor. Such jobs as weeding, for instance, could be done with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animal now stole, it was unnecessary to fence off pasture from arable land, which saved a lot of labor on the upkeep of hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was a need of paraffin oil, nails, string, dog biscuits, and iron for the horses' shoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also be a need for seeds and artificial manures, besides various tools, and finally the machinery for the windmill. How these were to be procured, none was able to imagine. You can notice I stumbled on that word. Sorry about that. Procured. That means what? How these were to be blank, no one was able to imagine. What would be another word we could substitute? How these were able to be obtained. How these were able to be received. Procured means to go out and to get something. So, how these materials were able to be procured, none was able to imagine. All right. And from there, you're going to be on your own. 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, and to the end of that chapter. So again, enjoy chapter 6 of Animal Farm. And remember the windmill and all the animals' efforts to build it.